Greetings everybody, my name is Tommy the Keyblade Master and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Hyperstone Heist as part of my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles month for my channel. And I'm at the last game from the classic series that I have in my collection. Now Konami did do a few other fighting games in the vein of Street Fighter 2 after this game was released. And from my memory, these games weren't that great. I only played the Super Nintendo a few times 20 years ago, but I remember it not being very good. At any rate, this one is a little hard for me to review. First off, growing up, I was a Nintendo fanboy, so Genesis sucks, Nintendo don't. However, I've grown up now, and I'm looking past that. However, I have a problem with Hyperstone Heist is because it borrows a whole lot from Turtles in Time, but it doesn't quite show the creativities that Turtles 3 did with its license. Basically, this in a lot of ways feels more like a dumbed-down rehash of Turtles in Time, without a lot of its fun. Now, I'm not saying that it's Turtles in Time reshelled. It's a lot better than that. I'm just saying that there isn't much originality in this game. It seems to be slapped together from a whole bunch of other Ninja Turtles games and ideas, and that does bring down the fun. But I'll try to analyze this as a standalone title and not try to compare it too much to Turtles in Time, although I will tell you right now that the graphics and sound are better on the Super Nintendo version, and yes, I will bring it up in my review. Alright, the story in this game starts off again with April doing a newscast very similar to the one done in Turtles in Time. However, instead of Crane flying in and stealing the Statue of Liberty, the Statue of Liberty and the entire island of Manhattan disappear from behind her. Shredder comes on the TV again, showing that the entire island of Manhattan has been shrunk, and he taunts the Turtles, saying that he now has the legendary Hyperstone of Dimension X. And he also seems to have stolen the legendary anabolic steroids of Dimension X. Look at him! The guy is huge now for some reason in these cutscenes. Anyways, the Turtles decide to go after him to destroy the Hyperstone and see if they can't restore Manhattan to its former glory. A few story nitpicks, because this is the laziest story out of all the Ninja Turtle brawlers, is that if the Turtles live on Manhattan Island, wouldn't they have been shrunk too? And you even go through the streets of Manhattan regular size, so the story obviously doesn't match the gameplay. But then I'm doing something stupid here, and that is over-analyzing the story of a brawler, which is basically just beat the crap out of enemies and move from screen to screen, repeating said process until you get to the end. Still, it is kind of a funny overlook that Konami did. If you're going to shrink Manhattan, you're going to shrink the Turtles, and even the writing in the 1980s show wasn't that sloppy. Now let's talk about the graphics for a minute here. They look pretty good, I suppose. They're pretty much watered down versions of the Super Nintendo sprites. But still, the Super Nintendo sprites were large and well animated, and so are these, and the bosses look fine. My main problem, though, comes with the overall resolution of the game. It is a lot lower quality than the Super Nintendo version, and for someone who has owned and played the Super Nintendo version for as long as I have, it was noticeable when I bought this game for the Genesis a few years ago. You can just kind of tell the graininess of the picture, and it is a bit distracting. Also gone are some of the cool Mode 7 effects. You can no longer throw enemies at the screen, nor is there any stage remotely good looking as Neon Knight Riders in this version. Still, what you have here is interesting, and some of the backgrounds that are new look pretty good. For example, when you enter Shredder's hideout, it looks like a Japanese dojo, and it does a pretty good job here. That said, the game's not afraid to occasionally reuse an area out of Turtles in Time. For example, this area right here and the Technodrome elevator are exactly the same as they were in Turtles in Time. Oh well, like the Super Nintendo version of Turtles in Time, this game does allow you between two choices of skins, anime and comic. Wait, Anime? No, that would just be weird. Actually, anime in this case means animation. That is what the Japanese word stands for, and they obviously shortened it in this option menu. Animation in comic is the same as the Super Nintendo version. Animation gives you skins that look like the 1980s cartoon series, while the comic skin gives you a darker color palette more towards the comic book versions. Again, if you choose Donatello, he's going to have that brown skin to him. In the end, the Genesis version's graphics don't hold up to the Super Nintendo versions, but they're pretty good on their own. It's a nice enough looking brawler, and if you own a Genesis, you won't be complaining about the graphics too much. I just happen to have owned both, and I can do the comparison and come up with the fact that the Super Nintendo version is a much prettier game. Let's move on to the sound, shall we? The music in this game, for the most part, are just remixes from Turtles in Time, and not quite as good as the music in Turtles in Time. I'm not saying the music is bad, it's still better than the stuff that Ubisoft put in their Turtles in Time Reshelled, but it does sound weaker than the Super Nintendo version. Take a listen. And here is the Super Nintendo version of that track. Yeah, the Super Nintendo version music is definitely better than the Genesis version, but that said, the Genesis version still sounds good to me. However, you have to realize there is one thing too. I bought the Super Nintendo version when I was like 14. I bought the Genesis version when I was like 28, so I've been playing the Super Nintendo version a whole lot longer than the Genesis version, and I'm very fond of how that music sounds. The Genesis version just seems so much toned down to me, and I have to knock it off a point or two for that. I'm sorry guys, but that's just the way it is. Let's talk about the gameplay in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Hyperstone Heist. Let's start off with the good stuff. I love the combat against the regular enemies. It's pretty good. The controls are still as good as the Super Nintendo. While you can't throw enemies against the screen like you could on the Super Nintendo version, the controls are still pretty solid, and it's still a pretty fun brawler. Just beat up foot soldiers, Bowsers, and whatever the game throws at you and proceed. It's a pretty simple and pretty fun game to play as. Now, I do have a few complaints, mainly with the bosses. All the bosses here have been either seen in Turtles in Time or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the arcade game. They're taken directly from those two games. And while they are presented here okay, the lack of originality is frustrating. Also frustrating is there's only one original boss, and it's freaking Tatsu, the bald Japanese guy that they easily beat up in Ninja Turtles 1 and Ninja Turtles 2 live action movie. He's here as a new boss, he's uber cheap, and he's not very fun. And another small complaint I have is, why do all the bosses blow up? Rocksteady should not be blowing up. Tatsu should not be blowing up. What the heck? Last time I checked, Tatsu was human in those movies. He shouldn't be blowing up just 'cause he got his butt kicked by a bunch of mutated amphibians. It makes no sense. Ew, I got Tatsu all over myself. This better come off in the wash. Anyways, the idea that these villains just blow up is stupid and lazy. The death scenes in the Super Nintendo version, I have to bring it up again, were creative. For example, Leatherhead fell off the train you fought him on. Baxter Stockman's gun blew up. Here they blow up like they're robots when they're not. It makes no sense, and it's kinda silly. But if you want to know something that really chaps my hide, it is the fourth stage in this game, the next to last stage. It is nothing but a cave full of previous bosses. You have to fight Leatherhead, Rocksteady, and freaking Tatsu all over again. This reeks of laziness on Konami's part, like they didn't want to give us an actual pre-stage in the cave system with an interesting boss, so they just rehashed a whole bunch of bosses we just fought and threw in one that we've already fought before in the arcade game. This is laziness, and it's absurd. I don't think it would have flown if it was made in today's standards. When I got to this stage, it was frustrating and I was put out. Now I will give Konami some credit. The next stage, the Technodrome, which is the final stage, isn't half bad. Its color scheme could use a little work, but for the most part it's pretty fun. I do have a gripe. The last two bosses, and I've already mentioned this before, all the bosses you fight here have been seen in other Turtles games, and no exception for Krang and Super Shredder. Super Krang here fights exactly like he did in Turtles 4, Turtles in Time. Oh yeah, don't be surprised the fact that you're not floating on a hoverboard, but this fight is exactly the same. He uses the same tactics, and he's about as easily beaten as he was in that one. And then Super Shredder is the exact same fight, too. He glows different hues this time, but he uses the same powers. He'll throw fire on the ground, shoot ice in the air, and then he'll have the one-hit kill move that can shrink you if he throws out a fireball. This is kind of disappointing. I really got put out with that fourth stage. It has no creativity in it, and it really just seems to stop the flow of the game. What can I say? Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Hyperstone Heist is a hard game for me to rate. It is not Turtles in Time, but it takes a whole lot of its assets to make this game. What Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Hyperstone Heist is supposed to be was something for Konami to give Genesis fans that felt left out, because all the Turtles games that were brawlers were on Nintendo consoles, so this was an original game for Genesis owners to have to feel good that they got a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game. And I would be happy to let it go at that. It's not as good as Ninja Turtles 4, but it has some good stages and some good brawling. If it wasn't for that fourth stage, I hate it when game developers pad their games like this, making it uber frustrating just going through an unnecessary boss rush. If it wasn't for that, this game would be pretty decent. But when I put that stage 4 in there, it all of a sudden falls way below what Turtles in Time was. It's a little better than Reshelled because it's got the better controls, but not by much. I just consider it an average brawler. And when you considered Sega made their own classic brawler, which is a blast to play called Streets of Rage 2, I can't really say go out and get this unless you're a die-hard fan of the Ninja Turtles for the Sega Genesis. You have the Streets of Rage series and you've got the Golden Axe. All of them are better brawlers than this one, I'm afraid. Again, it's not a bad game. I would not put it on the worst of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles list by any means, but I wouldn't put it on the best list either. It is average at best, which is kind of unfortunate. If you feel like you need to go out and play it, I won't stop you. It is not a bad game to play through a time or two. Just know that the Super Nintendo version, Turtles in Time, is better. And since a lot of the newer consoles or clone consoles that are coming out allow you to play both Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis games, you would be better off seeking out Turtles in Time for the Super Nintendo before you sought after this one, in my personal opinion. Alright, a quick history lesson, since this is the last game that I own from the original series. It was not the last game ever made, though. Konami did make a few brawlers for the consoles. They were kind of Street Fighter 2 knockoffs, and from the one I played 20 years ago or so, they weren't that good, in my personal opinion. They weren't the worst fighting games I've ever played by any means, but they weren't that great. Who knows, someday I might pick them up to review them, but I don't have them with me today. Anyways, in 1996, CBS finally canceled the original television series, bringing it to an end. After that, we got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Next Mutation, the one series that most Ninja Turtles fans do not like to talk about unless they're using words like awful, terrible, and creepy. Yeah, you've heard the nostalgia critic complain about bunny boobies. This show had turtle boobies with a female turtle named Venus. It was an awful, awful show. It tried to mix the Power Ranger formula with the Ninja Turtles that used ugly costumes. Let's just not talk about it. It is out on DVD if you want to watch it, but from about the 5 or 6 episodes I watched, I just remember it being terrible. In 2003, though, 4Kids got a hold of the Ninja Turtles license and made a new series, this time with one of the Ninja Turtles creators as an advisor to them. What we got was a series that was darker in tone and more serious in the way that it took itself. Konami once again got licensed to make this new show. Now, Konami made 3 console games from the 4Kids series. I unfortunately only own one, but I have played the other 2. I would put them about at the same level as Hyperstone Heist. They're good Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games, they're well designed, but they're not great by any means. I do, however, have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 for the PS2, and that's what I will be reviewing next time. And no, it has nothing to do with the Manhattan Project.